Okay, yeah, like just open the table.
I think it's just about like notes. Oh, okay, is that the reason to switch around? Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Three times obviously, I'll take that, so one times 1, 1 times 7, 2 times 8, and we times half of them, 1 times 3, 2 times 4. Any questions before we get started?
Wait, sorry, I missed you guys' names because I was writing.
Awesome.
Natalie. Natalie.
Good.
William.
And then
Cool. Right. Going out there around the first few
Yeah, maybe fight some place.
yeah.
No, that's right.
Thank you.
I was so out
We're all fine.
So good.
I think I will get to
When an influencer views their child as a paycheck, and their viewers see their advice as flawless, we create a lifetime of trauma for commercialized children and a web of confusion for parents consuming their content. 4 things are we doing for you in my speech today. First of all, some setup. Secondly, defining the counterfactual on what we see would be replacing this world if we did not have these parenting influences. And then on to my 2 substantive points. 1, the influence and the impacts that parenting influences have on other parents and their kids, and then another one on the influences kids themselves. But first of all, the setup. So what do we define as being important in this debate? What do we think is like the way we win this debate? What do we want out of this debate? We want the best outcomes for the kids primarily. We're perfectly fine if parents have to like do a bit of extra work, if they have to take on a bit of extra stress. We see that just like being part of parenting. It's not an easy thing to do, it's just something you have to do. And we always want the best thing for the kids. We want the best things for the kids of other parents, but we also want the best thing for the kids of other influencers. What are parenting influencers? Of course, we have this clarification that both sides now know about these guys being high influence, being high influence, who use parenting a lot in their confidence. So we believe if something is revolving around parenting, we believe there's a high incentive for parents to actually use kids in their content a lot. Why do we think this? Firstly, because they don't have other credibility around their content. They have to use their kids and their own experiences as that credibility to get that point across. They don't have surveys, they don't have credentials, they don't have PhDs and these things. They're just parents, so they've got to use their kids as examples and proof. And we also believe this is far more engaging when you see a cute little kid on screen that gets people involved. Secondly, we believe that anyone can be an influencer, right? All you need is to be popular to be an influencer on social media. You just need a camera, and you just need a kid, and you just need a public account. Those are the 3 things that you need. And we generally believe that the majority of people don't have credentials, and we'll explain that a bit more out later. So what do we believe the counterfactual is? So as a status quo, we believe that people online, these people online who people are turning to, There are 2 reasons why people get this content on their feed on the status quo. One is because they search it out because they're desperate, they're tired, they're new parents, they don't have any time, they're not getting a whole lot of sleep, and they're in a unique situation, their child has a disease or something, and which they don't get other books. So they search it out, they look on social media, they get that quick advice in your pocket when you don't think you have a lot of time, you have that quick, easy alternative in your pocket on social media, so you go there. We also believe that like, when you're just having a kid, even if you are experienced, the algorithm is going to like push this content towards you based off your purchases in the past. And so we believe like you're going to be exposed to like other parents all the time in your social media feed. What do we think the counterfactual is? We believe that ultimately, like before social media, we already had these mechanisms to teach like parents how to parent. Free classes, books, like professional advice that you get and you'll be able to buy and you'll be able to use. We believe in the absence of social media influencing, you just turn to these alternatives again and you just continue doing this. So you go to this expert advice where like you have these long forms, and we'll explain why we believe this is expert advice in this next point. So what is this next point? What are the impacts on other parents and like other kids? So firstly, we believe, like context on this point, again, anyone can be an influencer, and we'll prove to you on this point that the impacts of having less credible influencers with more influence is going to have negative impacts on these kids and in the future. How do we prove this? We prove this because first of all, we believe that these people, these social media influencers, are just less legitimate. Why do we believe this? Because when social media influencers have no screen, have no background checks, and nobody always looking over their shoulder to check that the things they're doing are wrong. They don't have credentials to do this. They're literally taking their own experiences. Comparing this to the counterfactual, where it's like publishing companies, it's books, it's like TV studios making television. What do they have? They have a high reputation which they need to maintain. They have an incentive to make sure all the information they're putting out into social media, putting it out into the world is correct and is not going to cause serious harm. So they've got screening processes to make that their information they're getting is scientifically backed up and is good for children and good for parents to be doing. We don't believe social media companies have this incentive to do that. And we also believe they have like less resources to do that even if they wanted to. So we believe what the outcomes of this is social media influencers are pushing wrong, broad and incorrect content and parenting advice to people. I believe parents are going to use this advice, and I'll explain that a bit more later. But what are the outcomes of this? It means like giving wrong information or wrong information or bad information. It's things like making sure your child gets like a lot of protein early because like I think it works on my child, which you don't want to do because they don't have teeth, right? Or it's like making sure they like sleep on their front or something, or like go to the baby every time the baby is crying because like you need to coddle them when they're young, which we don't believe is like backed up by scientific evidence. So what are the outcomes of this? It means parents and kids are like getting bad information, which is impacting their child's development, like physically, but also like mentally in what they're learning. And yet we don't believe under our counterfactual that we are getting this outcome because we believe the information that they're getting is good, backed up information. Secondly, we believe that like there's a simplification problem with the algorithm. The algorithm operates on hashtags, operates on phrases, operates on like quick content that gets you out into the world. You're benefited, you have an incentive as a social media influencer to play into these hashtags. So what do we mean we're doing? If you already have a high level of influence, what you've done is you've played into these hashtags, even if you have like nuanced ideas about, oh, this is a new way of parenting, it may be good, you've had to simplify it down into hashtags and things like that, where you can't get that point across. You're benefited from short videos, so therefore, what you're doing is you're nuancing down, you're simplifying down those ideas. So again, we believe you're giving bad advice, even if your original intention was for it to be good. And we don't believe that, and looking at the counterfactual again, we don't believe this is happening because you have more time to explain in a book or on TV, so we don't believe that's happening. Okay, thirdly, we believe that why do we think that people are actually going to trust this information? We believe that first of all, new parents are unsure, they're desperate, they're tired, as I said before. They're going to look for help, and what they're going to do, they're going to tend to those accessible things, those 60-second clips, instead of wanting to read a video, because they want to get sleep instead of reading that book. And at our side of the house, we believe that no, actually you do just have to maybe stay up longer, maybe watch that hour-long TV segment, or read that book. It might be more effort, but we believe you get better advice. We believe on their side of the house, we're just getting bad advice, or at the very worst, we believe that no advice is as good. Experienced parents again, we just believe that the algorithms are going to push them, as I explained to you before, we're going to get that bad advice. So why is this important? We believe actually, no, I'll get onto that later. So, on to my second point now about influencer kids. We believe that there's a commercial incentive for your children to be doing this stuff, and with your children, you get your money off this, you make your livelihood off this. Firstly, we prove this by showing that in order to do this, in order to be a successful influencer, again, you want to have your children, so you're sharing moments of your children, you have your children online all the time. We believe this is high influence, you're reaching lots of other kids. It means you're reaching other kids that could be other parents, that could be going to your primary school, for example, or the same primary school as your kid. What do you do? If you're a parent, you're showing your kids what you're looking at online, or how you're teaching them, and stuff like that. So we believe if those other kids of those parents are going to the same schools as your other parents, we believe what do kids do? They tease you if you have something embarrassing online. We believe this going to lead to like bullying, teasing, and stuff like that. You're going to go to school, you're going to hate going to school if you're an influencer's child, and we believe this is going to lead to things like trauma, things like bullying, which is really bad for them. Secondly, we believe you also have to a really high standard if you're an influencer's kid. You need to be able to, as an influencer's kid, or as an influencer, so that your children is like a perfect person, because therefore that's how you like get people trusting you and always watching you. We believe you're holding them to this high standard always when they're acting, but also like outside. So we believe you've got more pressure on your child, and you're always like saying, no, you need to do better, you need to do more. We believe children can like be brought up like inferiority complexes because of this, but also like far more pressure and far more stress. Which is like a net negative for the children. And we also believe like in the process of filming, in the process of all the time you need to do child, thirdly, and lastly, all the time you need is like time you can be spending elsewhere on education and things like that. We think it's not being spent, so we believe that ultimately the children themselves of these influences are going to have net negatives because of this. And then we also believe that parenting as a whole gets a whole lot more worse, and that is why I'm proud to affirm the motion that we should not be living in a world where we don't have parenting influences.
Like to speak for the speech, and allow the first speaker on the video.
Imagine that you are very new to being a parent. You're struggling to be able to know what to do. You're not going to read some big old tome, some big old book written by someone like 50 years ago who has no idea what your kids are facing. You're going to want to read something up to date, something tried, or look at something up to date, tried and tested. In this speech, I'm going to go over some rebuttal for the first affirmative team speaker before clarifying a little bit of setup and then showing how this goes into our main point about how this is going to lead to better parenting and the outcomes that it has for our main stakeholders, the children of tomorrow, as stated by the affirmative team. So some rebuttal. The first affirmative speaker has told us a lot about the falsification of this information, about how all you need is a camera and a kid and an account. However, we believe that these creators are going to be held accountable for a few reasons. First of all, there is competition. They want views, but there are heaps of other parenting influences. So they're going to want to make sure the information is accurate and therefore gets the views. This also leads into another control that they're not going to be caught in a scandal. They're not going to be able to be, that person that was giving really bad advice that, I don't know, you should sleep your child hanging upside down by the ankles. You're not going to want to be caught in that kind of scandal, have that on your record, and ruin your influencing and your life by that. And finally, can't read it. Also, people are going to want new content. The first affirmative speaker said that they're going to be stuck in a rut echo chamber, making the same kind of content as everyone else. But that's not how you get more views. You get more views by exploring a new technique. Maybe it appeals to a different amount of, different types of people. Maybe it appeals to people of your culture. And finally, they have talked about books as a more relevant source of information. As I've told you, a lot of these books were written a long time ago, and they're not really the main source of info. There's not really a large amount of books present on how to deal with kids and social media. And finally, with these books, new parents don't really have the time to read these big old books, and people's reading ability is decreasing. So I think it's far better that the parenting is done right and they get that information from social media than we'd be really old school and be like, we should be reading books. If they're getting this good information and the kids are benefiting, then that's what's important. So going into some setup with influencers, as I've said before, they're going to want to keep their reputation good. They're not going to want to be caught in a scandal, and this is what makes their information worthwhile. And also we see that these days a lot of parenting is really different. The older generation doesn't quite understand and can't offer the same support as they once might have because there's all these new challenges like social media, like the expectation to have dual incomes and both be working. There's a lot less time that parents actually have for children, and this means that they need faster solutions. They need something that more accurately relates to them. They don't want to have to read a really old book and then go, oh, okay, how can I relate this to social media? They want something that is tried and tested, because that's the other part of this. The influencers, they're filming their own kids, which shows that what they're doing is working for them, and that you can see the benefits and what the outcomes of it.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Do you believe that like every child will be the same, and so like all the robots or ones have to be applied to every single other child?
No, and that is, I'm really glad you brought that up actually, because what happens with content creators is you get this whole range of different styles of parenting that are supported on social media. And actually I'm going to get into my point, which is this is going to lead to better parenting. So, we've told you that most of this information is going to be accurate for reasons previously discussed, and also that there are a wide range of parenting styles, and they fit all different kinds of situations. Like you might have less money, and so you might be an influencer who's like, oh, well, you could save money doing this, or spending money on this is unnecessary. Or you might have a certain culture, it's an influence of that culture might post, and give you advice for how in that culture you would raise your kid. And this is really important because it means that it's not books are harder to write. It's harder to have like a book on a range of topics, but it's easier to have all these videos with different influences. So therefore, parents get valuable information from the social media. However, this is not the only source of information parents are getting. I'd like you to remember this. They also have general practitioners, like a New Zealand Plunkett or something. So they're getting the important medical advice from other sources. However, we believe it's mainly the style, the culture, like advice on what books to read to your kid or something that they're getting from social media. So they're not going to be accidentally killing their kid by feeding it too much protein or whatever, but they are going to be getting advice on what other people find works for their kids. So, what do we see as the outcomes of this? Well, the first one is the validation of parenting in our society. As I said before, a lot of focus is on dual incomes and both parents working, and so therefore parenting has been kind of shoved to the side as not so important. Especially if you want to be a stay-at-home parent, it's not really seen as a job so much. And we believe that what this has done to our society, these parenting influences, is that it has created a bigger emphasis on parenting. And parenting is so important. It's raising the generation of tomorrow. It's meaning that our kids have these values, they have this learning, they have this understanding of their culture and their identity, they have this knowledge that they're loved. And if you put all those things into one person, isn't that what's so important? Like, the groundwork of your identity is who you are and how and where you come from. And so, we're telling you that the social media parenting has brought parenting back into the public eye, and this resurgence and the importance of it is so valuable. This means that parents will, maybe be putting aside a few appointments or unnecessary things in their life and spending more time with their children. Isn't this the best thing you can do as a parent? And secondly, we believe this encourages different styles of parenting. One size doesn't fit all, as the Affirmative team has kindly reminded us. And in previous generations, this has kind of been ignored. There was quite authoritarian parenting. Quite, okay, you have to behave, speak and don't be heard. Don't be heard, well, I don't know, you know what I'm saying. It was quite authoritarian, but now we're seeing these different styles, like, hey, you can do this differently. Yes, you can be a stay-at-home dad or whatever. You can arrange what works for you. It doesn't have to be all the same as what your grandparents did. And this is why we believe grandparents don't always have such a big influence as they might have in the previous generations, and why the social media is so requisite to parenting these days. And what this shows is that anyone can parent with love and guidance, but there are different ways of parenting that suit you. So what do we see in the status quo on our side of the house? We see that this influencing has allowed people to be better parents, to put the emphasis on the love and attention and nurturing. And we see that it has encouraged that they can do it in different styles that work best, rather than trying to force, square into a circle and do it someone else's way. So therefore we see a better world where children have been raised better, and this is the future generations. People have more love and more respect for each other and more knowledge of who they are.
I'd like to thank Smith for this speech, and I'd like to be sitting with Affirmative.
Three things to do for you in my speech today. First, to explain this question around the quality and accountability. Second, to engage with their material on emphasis. And third, to have a look at where that leaves us in the debate and what the most important questions are that remain unaddressed. Alright, so first let's get on to this idea of quality. We get a big push from the Negating team that there is some kind of accountability through competition because they want to be the best. What does this competition actually drive? We actually see this as a negative incentive. Why? Because when you are competing on social media, you're competing for views, you're competing for clicks, you are not competing for quality, you're competing for engagement. This can even be people engaging with your thing in a negative way, it still boosts it. So when you create something controversial, when you put a crazy theory out there that is just completely stupid, you get more engagement, you beat out the competition, you stifle those voices that aren't reducing to these tactics, and you get worse social media parenting advice. This is one of the perverse incentives that means we are getting horrible advice because they are constantly competing for views and not for quality, and we know that they can get views by making content that is more general and more imperative. These look like videos like, you have to do this for your child, that say, okay, here's one rule that works for all children. Why does that work? Because everyone watches it, because everyone has all children. If I make a video that says, here's what to do for your 12-year-old autistic black daughter, that's going to make a lot less amount of people who are actually engaging with that content, clicking on it, than here's what to do every child ever, right? Also, the imperative nature telling you you have to do this helps draw people in, it helps control them, it helps them keep coming back to your channel because they're worried, oh my goodness, here's this thing I have to do that I'm not doing. Rather than, oh, you know, here's something I did. That's not engaging, that's not getting me thinking, oh no, I must find out what it is that I'm missing out on. That's why we get this content that is actually in competition, that is actually negative, and that is actually bad for our advice. They also tell us that they want to avoid scandal. We don't see this as being true for several reasons. One, everyone sort of thinks they can get away with things. That's how we get scandal in the first place. Nixon didn't think he'd get caught at Watergate. That's why he did it. So they think, actually, maybe this will work out. Maybe this new technique that I've made up won't be too bad, and then I can get away with it. But also, they are relatively short-term thinkers, right? People are incentivized by what they can get the next day, right? By their immediate benefits. They are dazzled by the money, their social media influencers, and so they forget about the potential consequences. They forget about the future, and they go for it now. That's why they create bad advice. That's why they might create scandal, and that's why that point that they gave you does not interact with our quality material at all. Right, but we also get this idea that this allows them to pioneer, and then they can come up with new techniques that no one ever came up with. Not only is this non-exclusive, it's actually more likely that doctors and theorists can come up with better ideas for children, or just experienced childcare professionals can come up with better ideas for children than people with a sample size of one. They told you it was tried and true on one kid. Every kid is different, and when you have such a small sample size, but you're creating such generalized advice, as we told you, you are generalizing nuance. You are taking away what actually made that advice work, and so you are making it worse. You are distilling it down, you are watering it down, etc. But also we tell you that this pioneering of new techniques is a lot of where the risk comes from. Why? Because rather than pioneering the technique by thinking it through, running it past an ethical committee, proposing it, and then putting it in a book,
How many parents do you seriously think would consult the findings of an ethical committee on a basic parenting practice?
That's not what an ethical committee is for. The ethical committee says, yeah, you can put that theory in your book that the parents are going to read because they care about their children, and we want them to read the book instead of going to social media because it's fundamentally better for the child. That means that the information in that book is more reliable. That is what the ethical committee is for. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, now, so this pioneering is actually where a lot of the risk comes from, because we're inventing new techniques out of the blue. We're not testing them, we're not thinking about the possible consequences, we're not consulting, we're just hurling them out there and trusting the judgment of one random individual with a camera who's just really good at clickbait titles. That doesn't make them good at helping your child, and that means we're creating more dangerous techniques. Alright, finally they told you that there's like lots of different types and lots of news sources. First of all, obviously this is something that's not exclusive. You can have classes taught by people for specific groups. You can have books written by people for specific groups, because obviously that niche is still there in our world we're imagining without parenting influences. It's obviously still people who want this advice, so there's still going to be a market for people giving it, just through a much better, much more reliable source of information that's going to have a much more legitimate process to ensure that it is not going to be the dangers that we are worried about. The fact that they can get it easier just means that rather than like someone who's an expert on that specific culture and how they raise their children, etc., it could just be anyone with any idea of how they think it should work, and they can get away with that because there's no legitimate process. Also, most importantly, they are losing the nuance. When they tell you about these specific types of parenting, these are lost on social media because, as we told you, you slowly lose nuance so you can appeal to a wider and wider broad spectrum. This means that actually they don't have a lot of the niche content they would like you to believe, but we do, because rather than trying to appeal to a really broad spectrum, we are trying to outcompete other books in a market where quality does matter, because there is book reviews, because there is systems you have to go through to get these books published, because there is much more critical analysis for books, because there is fundamentally a little less books and a little easier, like it's a little more scrutinized than social media, where there's people putting out videos absolutely every day, right? Okay, so at the end of this point we understand that actually we are having much, much worse quality when we simplify down, as we told you, when we lose the nuance, when we generalize, and when we take advice from random people who have tested this out on one specific child and are now trying to tell everyone that it's a good idea. This is a terrible point, right? This is really, it's a great point, but it's really bad for the people involved, right? Because this means that we are simply getting much worse parenting techniques. We're actually okay if parents have to engage a little more in the raising of their child if it results in the child having a much, much better being raised, not like having a bunch of bad parenting techniques practiced on them and not being the guinea pig for these new forms of social media parenting testing. Alright, so moving on now to this idea of emphasis. They told you that they're like placing an importance of parenting. Several responses for you here. First of all, they're reducing parenting to small tips and tricks. I see no way in which reducing the entire concept of parenting to several 60-minute video clips is creating importance around it. I actually think that what we're doing here when we reduce parenting to these things, when we say parenting can be solved in like 5 easy tricks, we are reducing the nuance and importance of parenting. We're reducing the fact that parenting is mostly about quality time, and we're offering quick fixes that fix nothing. That is what we are doing, and that is why we are reducing the importance placed on parenting. But also, we see that parenting in society is obviously just seen as important. Social media influences are not what makes people think I should raise my child, right? There are fundamental societal narratives, there are fundamental evolutionary instincts that mean that people are trying to make sure their children are raised right. That drives them in the first place to these forms of bad advice on their side of the house. Also, they tell you that like this is going to encourage parents to spend more time with their kids. Even if we take their best case scenario, we engage with like the fact that suddenly parents care about their kids all of a sudden, right? That's still bad, because when they're spending time with their kids, they're instituting this this bad advice that they're getting. They're instituting this unrecommended random advice. So maybe rather than like playing a game of catch with their kid, they're like, okay, I'm going to do a bunch of push-ups with my kid because the influencer tells me that's going to make them really strong early on, and that's having really bad effects on the kid. Right, now finally, I would just like to say that one thing has not been responded to, and we actually think it's the most important thing in this debate. The children of influencers. The most tangible harm in the world is the fact that these children are being exploited. These children have to be perfect every day. These children come under the scrutiny of thousands of people. Oh, is that 8 minutes? Oh crap, sorry. Sorry, I genuinely thought it was 7.
I'd like to speak for the speech and invite the second speaker of the
beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. Is the engagement with this highly social or social media permissible content of parenting, is it rather blatant a suppression of these ideas onto children, or rather is it cogent engagement and adaptation of the ideas suggested in this context to children? Okay, 3 things I attempt to achieve in this speech. Firstly, outlining a clash on setup and clarification, specifically regarding the nature of parents as actors throughout the predominantly Western world. We see the scope of this debate occurring. Secondly, on the marketability and intent of social media products and the diversity of social media parenting products as we see it. Then secondarily, a clash on the betterment of information, which side contributes more so to the betterment of information. And then secondly, a clash on impacting, being the impact of this content counterfactually, so where does this content have the greatest impact and who for? And thirdly, a clash in response to their point on the role of the child actor, so described as a individual in this debate. Okay, firstly, what do you hear throughout their case and where we find issue with it surrounding their setup? Firstly, you'll hear they tell you that social media products surrounding parenting are inherently marketable products. They tell you very much that these are a commercialised product produced for financial gain, for financial viability, for the continued financial gain of the social media influencer, as we might see in certain instances of other influencers who may. And we think what this occurs is we partly think this is true of social media influencers. Why is it not so much true of parenting influencers? One, we think social media influencers, particularly those of certain viralities, are not always producing in the basis for profitability. One, because we don't believe social media is a particularly profitable platform unless a mass growth, which we don't really believe this content does because it's so diversified, because it's so individualistic to different contexts. We believe social media rather, there are a number of people who do it for the community which they gain, the communalism which they gain from the, say, 300, 200, or even 1,000 individuals which they gain with. They may only be generating so many cents per video, but really, realistically, we don't believe there's many people who use this as their sole charge of income. Thereby they claim that these influencers are these extortionists, profiteering individuals who will seek at any harm to just reduce quality in order to increase virality. It was really diminishing. We think even the use of hashtags and the adaptation, there are ways which you can kind of engage with algorithms without actually diminishing your content to such an extent. And we even think, we think this consciousness probably isn't exacerbated to the extent which is. We think maybe in terms of corporatism, corporate advertising, but not with the individual social media actor. We don't believe that these traits are really plausible to say just a diverse range, because obviously we have to establish diversity of these views really compared to the counterfactual sources. Because what do we have? They acknowledge that these sources are anecdotal, that there's limited scope. So now again, their clash on setup. Again, really we find issue with this academically, as they tell you, I would like them to actually suggest one source of academic literature on the subject that is actually completely validated. We believe there can be skewing, there can actually be misinformation. Why can this actually occur more so with these printed literature? One is outdatedness. One is the usurplessness of this information. So how can it be outdated? One, because we see the revision of these texts throughout years, we see them as commonly applied, but also is the assumption of this text that they are seen, they may not be as widely criticised because people, one, can't engage with them in the academic form which they're presented, and these ideas may be skewed for actually mass publication. Instead of the social media creator who tailors it to, say, a specific audience which they gain enjoyment and interaction with, rather we see this as curtailed for the most commercial impact. What does this look like in terms of tangible effects? It probably looks like, say, cultural relevancy. It may be curtailed from a Eurocentricist interest. It may not, say, include aspects that pertain to your culture. It may be curtailed to a particularly urbanistic influence. It may not curtail to your particular circumstances, whereas this individual influencer who has this anecdotal scope can. And I think the use of studies as well, we believe parenting in this experience is particularly anecdotal, and this is how this relates to really how the parent operates. We don't see that the parent is blatantly seeing this information and directly submitting it to parents. They portray the parent as an actor who acts almost an illiterate actor in this case, where they just directly convey the information portrayed in these sources and direct them to the parent. Well, why do we not see this as true? One, they provide you parents have this instinctive societal obligation to care for a child. So what does this realistically mean in their case? Well, it means that parents are actually generally likely to make some type of consideration. Why are they more likely to make this consideration with these sources? Because they actually have some component of understandability, of computability to the parent, opposed to this academic literature, which may sound very believable, but the point is that it sounds believable, it sounds reasonable, they're likely to just unscrupulously assume these ideas. So parents have this ability responsibility to try and interpret these sources, and we give you these internal controls of these documents. You've got public assurance, and I think they underestimate the concern. People do things because they want to be realised, and I think this is very different to political scandal where there's objective gain. People realise on social media, they'll be called out, they'll be shamed, they'll be kind of saying, he's a lazy influencer, he doesn't know what he's doing, he's got all the gear but he's got no idea. Like, they'll be seen kind of as really, we believe that this influence is actually true, that people are degraded, often people are often called out, and that is a common mode of social media exchange. And I don't find naming one industry of social media exposure where people aren't continuously critiqued. And we think more so that this would occur less so with these professional industries regardless of this control, just because of the corporate perversion which can occur and to create mass appeal. And before I move on, I'll take a point.
Does the speaker not recognise that even if they're not working for money, if they still want to get their message out and get engagement, that's still fundamentally what they're working towards?
Yeah, but engagement can mean a variety. Engagement just does not mean shared views. There are a number of commentators who actually recently engaged, say, with comment sections, through live streams, through all various sources with individuals. We don't believe this means this inherent virality that you'd say get with this kind of corporatist approach. We don't believe this is really intrinsic, and sure in some cases, and say in cases that parents directly compute. We believe these parents, if they directly compute this information, what's to say they're not going to make other poor parenting choices? What's to say they don't do this with other types of literature? If you really operate in this way, this domineering approach where you just input everything without making this consideration, should you really be responsible for that child in the first place? I don't believe that characterises a responsible nor caring parent if you just needlessly interpret this information. But, okay, secondarily, onto the case of child examples. And I think we weigh this, they present a narrative quite similar to child act. Why is this in some cases just not true to the same extent? Why does it weigh comparatively less? I think the extent that this may incur bullying for certain children. I think this is very similar to what we see like child social media posting with parents' accounts. And I think this really has to be considered with them. It's likely that the child's at a young age, very likely, because if they're of an older age, it's likely that there's going to be some consenting in this process as well, but it's not likely, the child may feature as an exemplar of the process, but it's not likely that the child is inherently used to promote the content. Why? Because that interpretation is just so fundamental to the promotion of this content. So where do we weigh this point against really the counterfactual? So where do we see these actors? Another thing is that is the symmetrical nature of what they impose. We don't believe this approach necessarily degrades the ability for public professionals, paediatricians, all these advisory sources, but really to be present, we believe parents can consult multiple modes, and generally that is available to most parents. But where is the benefit of this approach? So counterfactually, we see the greatest benefit is for those parents who would be otherwise isolated from these sources, would not be really able to access them. And we tell you this academic literature just due to the presence of reading, due to the expense of this literature, and as well as the concerns we have, but just does not have that same benefit. But if you counterfactually take the example, right, say you've moved to another country where your culture is not instilled with this, your language is not easily instilled, you want to be able to instill this from a personalised view, or you say, you're in a very busy lifestyle, say you're a contract milk and you're moving season after season around various areas, or you've moved as a foreign speaker of another language to another country, you're in a very urbanised environment, you don't have that supportive context. We see these individuals, as will be articulated later, as those requiring the greatest benefit of these contents, and this is why I rest my case. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Steve for their speech, and I'd like to be third and first.
We live in a world that has been consumed by likes, clicks, views, and the perceptions of others based off of 60-second segments of our lives. We think that on their side of the house, they necessarily water down what it means to be a parent and what is involved in parenting when they condense it into reels and TikTok videos for tired parents of newborns who just want to go to sleep. Two things to get through in this debate. Firstly, on who gets better quality of content, and a small clash underneath this on what social media content actually looks like, and who gets better parenting, and as a result of that, better outcomes for children. And I will go into some of the content that was sadly unresponded to at James about the children of influencer parents and what this actually means for them. Okay, firstly on this quality of content. So let's approach this with the idea of what content actually looks like on social media. So they tell us that creators are held accountable because they have lots of competition, they want accuracy, and they don't want a scandal. Okay, firstly we tell you at Michael that no, they want views, right? So they'll push the easiest narrative that they can to reach the largest audience that they can, and this is a bad thing. We think that when they say that they don't want a scandal, we think that even if this is true, either way, someone on our side of the house who is writing a book with the risk of the validity of their PhD on the line is more likely to be concerned about the validity of their content than someone who may just lose their account and have to make a new one and start from scratch. Okay, so they've given us this idea of the fact that books are written long ago, and so they're going to have less information that is relevant in the modern day. Firstly, this is a regrets mood, right? So we think that we regret the rise of social media parenting because we believe that we would have more modern content such as literature, such as parenting classes available to people if it weren't for the rise of social media parenting. But taking them at their best, if we believe that books are just intrinsically outdated, that the info doesn't really matter, we think that perhaps this is not even a bad thing. We think that children have been the same 50 years ago and will be the same in 50 years in terms of how you should change their nappies, when you should start feeding them solid foods, very tangible things like that. And so we think that if you're getting advice from a book that was written 50 years ago, firstly, we think it's pretty easy for parents then to say, this book was written 50 years ago, I'm going to take some of what they say with a grain of salt, but we think that also the content is just as valuable because children are inherently the same as they were. How is this different on their side of the house? We think that when they have this push on social media that everything is super relevant, that everything is super modern, that you have to be listening to everything that you're told, it creates a well of confusion for these parents, who, especially new parents, who actually don't understand what's happening. We think that this actually waters down the quality of their content because there is so much of it, because there are so many different voices. No, thank you, Tim. And because of this, we think that we actually just have worse content on their side of the house. Okay. So what is unique to us is actually the legitimacy of this advice, and I think this is what they're missing. Anybody can form a social media account regardless of what they want to tell you. This is a fact. I could become a parenting influencer if I wanted to. I just had to take a photo of my toddler sister and say she was mine, right? Okay. So what do we have on our side of the house? We have people with PhDs. We have people who study child psychology. We think this is especially important for parents of children who aren't neurotypical, especially. When you think about children with autism, when you think about children with ADHD, they are all very unique because it is a spectrum. They all have different needs. Even if you have a social media influencer on their side of the house who is geared towards the specific, oh, I have an ADHD child, here's how I could help. We think that it's much more valuable on our side of the house to be getting that help from a registered professional versus some mom who just thinks that she has great advice. And so the quality of content on our side is better. And then we have this small push that when they tell us that social media content is not produced for money. Firstly, we just reject this, right? We think that people begin these social media accounts because they see them as lucrative, because they see the amount of money that comes with a certain amount of views. We think that even if we buy this, it actually waters down what they've told us about how people have more incentive to make things true, because we think that they have more incentive to make their content true when they're making money off of it. And also we think that what matters here is actually the community that parents have. What we regret a lot about influencer parenting is the fact that we have lost the sense of community in parenthood, where we used to have things like book clubs for mothers or new mother societies where they could come together and talk about their issues inside their communities with other mothers who understood the specific issues that they were facing in their specific areas. We think that this is a push they've actually tried to say they help with on their side of the house. We think this is impossible because of the range of social media, because of the variety of audiences, people simply aren't going to be able to make their content that tailored. We think that this is a harm they cannot get rid of. I'll take a point.
Do you seriously believe, even if you are making social, even if you have the intent to generate funds from social media, then why choose parenting content and content which only has one particular
Yes,
type of
William, I
appeal?
seriously believe this because some people have children and they view that as a way to make money. When you see that someone is posting their cute little newborn and making a lot of money out of it, you realize you have a cute little newborn, you post your cute little newborn, ergo, you've made money. And you think that you're going to be able to make a lucrative thing out of this. When they tell us that literature can be obscured because it can be outdated and because it can't be engaged with, again, this links into our community point because we think that we prefer for people to engage in this literature that exists on our side of the house within their communities, right? This looks like a book club for new mothers where they read a bunch of books and then they decide what they agree with, what they don't, what worked for their children. We think this is so much better. Okay, moving on to who gets better parenting then. And as a result, better outcomes for kids. So we have this idea of the range of content on social media. I've told you, we think that this is a bad thing. It confuses parents, it leaves them with so much conflicting advice. We think that it's actually just better to give them a book by someone with a PhD and tell them to try what works and see what happens. And then I actually want to address this thing that they brought up that I think is really cool about cultural context. And this ties into what I've told you about communities because they tell you that when you move and you have left your culture and you're kind of in a different area, that you're going to get comfort or advice out of social media because you don't really understand what's going on. Firstly, we think that on our side of the house, we're actually more likely to have better support networks in our communities that you can then join and you can meet a bunch of mothers that will help you get through this. Secondly, we think that social media actually waters this down because social media doesn't actually want to display this sense of diversity because they want more views. Even if they are trying to display this diversity, even if it is skewed towards your culture, we think that it is still one voice out of millions. We think that there's such a range in the ideas of what it means to be a parent that this simply cannot stand. And then they bring us this push that parenting is not important on a modern scale. Firstly, sense check this. We think that parenting is always going to be important because parents always exist, children always exist, parents always love their children. Even if this isn't true, we prefer a world in which emphasis on family comes from literature, comes from seeing that there are communities that actually put an emphasis on parenthood, as opposed to you see that people are parents when you open your phone every night to doom scroll. That is why they cannot win. That is why the move must stand.
Speech and invite the third speaker.
Right, may I start off by saying that the opposing team assumes the pure idiocracy of parents, that a parent will not apply reasonable judgment to advice concerning their child's welfare, something that is just instinctively we do. It's human nature. We are going to apply, especially a parent, a new parent, going to apply a great level of criticism and scrutiny to anything regarding our child's welfare. Right, this is factually untrue. And if you don't do that, if you don't apply that level of standard scrutiny, should you really be a parent in the first place? Anyway, right, our path to victory. Now, we believe that we won this debate firmly because we have proven quite simply that parenting influences have a net positive impact on society, particularly its families in society. Now, we see two main clash points throughout this debate. We see who gets better parenting on their side of the house and who gets better well-being of both the child and the child with the influencer as well. Right. I'd like to introduce some rebuttal from the opposing team. Now, they have been a firm maintainer of the legacy content in this debate, of books and TV shows and things of the like. But these previous supports are no longer relevant in today's day and age. I have some examples of previous support mechanisms and how they now are relevant. Right, first one, of course, is in-person support groups. No, thank you. In-person support groups. People we find nowadays are too busy with their full-time job to attend a parent support group with the time that would be needed to sufficiently get a benefit for it. And we find that these in-person support groups are underfunded, rare in urban contexts, and if funded, often sponsored by an organisation with a vested interest. No, thank you. And within selling you a product which benefits them. Now, the next mechanism of parental support is grandparent/parental help. Now, nowadays everything's happening old, marriage is happening older than it used to be. No, thank you, it's just a fact. Everything's happening older than it used to be. People are just getting older, they're doing everything later, at a later stage of life. And now, and this means that parents, when they become grandparents, well, parents of the parent, they do no longer have they have plenty of incentive to, they no longer have the capacity. No, thank you. They no longer have the capacity to help their children in their parenting struggles. They no longer have either the financial capability, as we have seen, old people are getting poorer. We no longer have the financial, and no longer have the physical strength to help out with the child in most cases. And in some cases, we have talked about geographical isolation and how this also may play a factor in that. And now another method of support that they've brought up continuously is books, TV shows. Now, let me ask you, who has time to read a massive book on parenting, especially if it's written by someone as an opinion? Who has time for that? Especially when you're the parent of a newborn child. You just don't have time. Like you have said that you're perfectly okay with overstressing and overworking parents if they get that extra hour of TV show before they go to bed, of something that may not even be particularly useful. No, thank you. Of something that may not be particularly useful in the first place. You've said that it's okay with this. This is just morally wrong. But anyway, moving on. To our next option, which sort of ties into the last one. We find that a lot of legacy options nowadays for parenting advice have moved online. It's a place that we can find them. And we believe that these constitute parenting influences as a main source of their content is indeed parenting advice, and they wield a large amount of influence. Now, we find that, they do this, no thank you, they do this in order to increase their influence, increase their money, it is a thing. However, their money comes from their validity, so it's still an incentive to maintain that. Now, this gives us all the benefits of their proven advice without the downside of asking a parent to stay up late and read a massive book. And also, a lot of this content that we're seeing online that they've said is just stupid, everyone's wrong, telling them to hang their children out by their ankles as they go to sleep at night. We find that it's not. Mainly, a lot of the content that we see is anecdotal. It is evidence of experience that you've had in your child. And even if you are just reading evidence of just one child, you're enriching yourself. You're seeing how different parents have done different things. You're discovering how other people have done it, which further enriches how you choose to do it, how you choose to raise your child. Now, the other clash that we've seen during this debate is what this content that's online has looked like. Now, I've just sort of addressed some of this in legacy options online, so this ties into that as well. Now, we find that, the traditional ones that talk about books, TV shows, the ones that have not yet moved online are particularly irrelevant, and also just a side piece, photos of children do not constitute advice. Parenting content we find it's not made for virality. Instead, if you want virality, you go for an Italian brain roll last night. You choose that because it takes significantly less effort to make something like Frappuccino, cappuccino, whatever it was. it takes significantly less effort to make that for an even greater amount of reward and no controversy. So if you wanted virality, you'd go for that instead of parenting. Oh, yes. Yeah, okay. Right. And they've also mentioned the bullying of the child. This comes under this comes under the well-being of the child, that flashpoint. Now, they've said that there's bullying. There's going to be a lot of pressure on the kid. Now, we've found this is outweighed by the successful future of the child, and because most of the parents' influences are reasonable, they will have reasonable boundaries in order to garner significant support from their audience. If they don't have reasonable boundaries, they will draw criticism from this, they will get less views, less support, they will just not be as successful generally. Now, I don't know, this is just a personal thing. If I saw a kid and I knew that their parents were online and they were successful online, I want to suck up to that kid because I want this money. Now, this is an incentive very much to not bully him. No, thank you. I want to suck up this kid because I want some of that money. That kid's going through college. That kid's got a name. I've got to go into debt for that, but no, not him because his mummy makes videos about him. Right. Anyway, ending this debate with some emotional impacting. Now, hopefully humour. Right. Now, imagine for a moment, none of us in here are parents, I think I can reasonably assume that, but imagine, well, I think you are in that instance. You are a new parent. You have no idea what to do. You've got this baby now, this precious life form that you've been born into the world, and it's just there, and you don't know what to do with it. Now, assume again that you are in a situation that's away from home. Away from home could look like an hour down the road from your parents. Really, that is a massive distance. But you have, as we have proven, you have little to no. And even if they are pure advertisements of parent support groups available that you don't have time to attend because you need a full-time job. Grandpa and grandma are just away. They have neither the financial capacity, neither the physical strength, and even if they were, neither the financial capacity nor the physical strength to help you in raising your child. And you end up working a full-time job, your child could grow up in daycare, and quite simply, you're just another daycare teacher to them. I mean, how sad is that? But instead, we propose a world where parenting advice is shared online, and you are able to see what other people have done to enrich your own experiences with your childhood, making you just a better parent, making yourself and your child feel better. You build a better future for your child, and that's what we want. That's what we advocate for on this side of the house, the better future of the child. I'm proud to say.
For their speech, and as is customary, the rest speaking will invite to reply speakers.
When does a joke become a dad joke? When it becomes apparent. Alright, in this reply, I am going to go over some of the main clashes I've seen in this debate, such as the amount of time and the quality of that time that parents are getting with their kids, the relative usefulness of books and other sources in place of social media, and the quality of advice that has been given on social media. So, first of all, let's look at the impact that social media has on kids when their parents are viewing it. We've told you that the parents are going to spend more time with kids, that it's going to make this parenting important. The Affirmative team has tried to tell us that there'll be bad advice, so the social media won't actually help. Well, I'll get into that shortly, how we've disproved that. And we believe that even if the advice isn't perfect and 100% catered for every kid, at least the parents are spending more time with them and making an effort. And that's all any parent can do, right? Alright, so they've tried to tell us there are a lot of other sources where on their side of the house parents will be getting information from, such as books. They've tried to tell us that books will always be accurate because, what's at stake is losing your PhD. I think realistically the modern human cares more about being extremely scandalised on social media and everyone going, oh, did you hear what that person did, than the fact that yes, you may lose something you've worked for, but realistically, it's not the same amount of public degrading, and they might even be less at stake because it might just be noticed in the editing process if something wasn't accurate, whereas people just post stuff, and they have to make sure that they are accountable for what they've posted. And we've also told you there'll be more niche content for a wider range on social media. And the Affirmative team have told us that there's also going to be books that cover this wide range. It's harder to write a book that might be consumed by less people because you might not get as much return from publishing, so publishers might not want to publish it. But for social media video, even if you're only reaching a few parents, as we told you, people are not always doing it for the money. They might be doing it just to reach out and connect with those other parents of a certain culture or something. So they do have incentive to post a video, whereas a book wouldn't be published on that. And they told us that support groups are very important and would overtake this in their side of the house, but we've told you that realistically they're not really run, they're underfunded, and they're not going to offer the same support that we will, because it's only in a small condensed community, whereas we're coming from all around the world. And one of their big pushes has been with influencers kids. As our third speaker has told you, maybe it's not so bad to be an influencer's kid. However, even if you believe the Affirmative team with everything they tell you about how horrible it is to be an influencer's kid, realistically, this is a really small group of people. It doesn't matter. There's just a few influencers kids in the world. It's so much better to be like, oh yeah, you might have a bit of a tough run on, tough luck. But everyone else's kids will benefit, and we believe that leads to a better generation all around. Alright, and finally the quality of advice. This is quite pivotal in this debate because we've seen a lot of arguments about whether people are doing this for money or not. If people are doing this content for money, then they're going to want to make it true because they're going to want it to stay out there so they can make money for it. If they're not doing it for money, they're going to want to be authentic. These are our two mechanisms for why people are going to want to have good content. And we've also told you previously about the want to avoid a scandal and how that will impact them. If we believe people have the incentive to make good content, and this will be true content. So when we come to the end of this, what have we shown you? We've shown you that parents will be spending more time with their kids, taking more care of them, that all of the Affirmative team's other mechanisms of this don't help, are not so relatable to the modern parent who doesn't have time to read books. And that the quality of advice is good on social media, so we see better parenting all around and better outcomes for the next generation.
I think normally when I like to do a leaders report, it's all about how many different ways we can win this debate. I think there's only one way we win this debate, and there's only one way either team wins this debate. It's basically who gets better parenting for their children, whose parents are acting better. So 3 points of class in this debate. First of all, what is the quality of content? Who gets better quality of content? And we kind of find this being almost contingent on getting better parenting. What are the impacts on this parenting? Here we're going to prove to you why actually we do believe that people are going to be trusting this content that they're getting, and why we don't believe that their part of victory was spending more time isn't true. And then finally we get this what are the impacts on influencers' children? Although I am very sad it fell out of this debate, but we don't believe it's as important as this first point. So onto these other points. So what about this first point about what is the quality of this content? So we give you a massive push hit throughout our line about how this parenting content is bad. I'll give you a lot of mechanizations for this because of the screening and the methods, because of the simplification. We get pushed back from the neg side about this because people want to avoid a scandal because they're in competition. We don't believe this is true for a variety of reasons. First of all, on this idea of calling it a scandal, we just don't believe Like, if someone has devoted their entire career to building up a PhD, to going to university, to making their study of children and how they work their entire lives, then it's just going to be like willy-nilly and like throw it away, just like throw it away at a whim. We hear like, and we don't believe like comparing that to someone like compare that to someone who's parenting content, and we actually hear them say in their speeches throughout their case, they're like, this isn't their main source of income, so they have far less incentive to make sure their income is, because they have less risk in losing it if they have other income streams to fall back on. So we just do believe that there's far more incentive for on our side of the house, more checks and more balances to make sure that our content is going to be better and have better advice for children. We also hear this idea that like, actually no parents, like parenting influencers don't want to do this, or like, are trying like really hard, they're not doing this for the money. We just don't believe this is true. We believe they're in this market because there is money in it. They can't do all the Italian brainwash stuff because everyone else has already done that, right? They're trying to find new ways, they're trying to get their babies, that's where they make their point of difference. We give you our alternatives and the counterfactual, that we have books and we have like these PhD theses and stuff like that. And we try to get some pushback on the story. Why no? Because this was written ages ago. First of all, no regrets debate. Like we assume that like this has had, like as I told you at first, that this is like being like building up over time in the world. This never happened. We didn't have this rise. But also, like, even if you don't believe that, like, babies have like evolved into aliens by this point from like 20 or 30 years ago, they still like know when to go to bed. They still have the same like evolutionary functions. So I still think those books stand. So at the end of this, why is this important? How do we win the debate through this? We win this debate through this because ultimately we get better if they have worse parenting content from parenting influencing, and we believe that like people are biased, and I'll explain to you why. We believe that's a net negative compared to a world in which we even get like slightly better or more like less. If they have people, even if like 99% of their other stuff is like good and it's perfectly fine, if 1% of that, if 1% of parents are taking bad information, bad quality information, those kids are getting impacted. Those kids are living worse lives because of that. We believe we don't get that under the side because we have more checks and balances that stop that from happening. That's how we win this debate on one point. Secondly, what are the impacts on this on parenting? We get a lot of like push about how like we get more diversity. We just don't believe that's true. Like even like mechanization, like we get first like simplification and how Lydia told you like it's watered down. We just don't believe that's going to be true. We get this idea that people are going to be able to interpret it. But again, like, even as I told you at first act, like new parents are inexperienced, they don't know what they're doing, they're tired, they're scared, they are not going to have reasonable judgment in these moments. And then we also get like, oh no, they're going to use both models. That's not going to be true, because they also told us they're really busy. They don't have time to do that. We just believe they're going to get the easy thing in their pocket. Ultimately, and they try to prove us to this, that even if they are using it, they have a way to win this debate because they have more time with them. We just don't believe that's true, because if your child is on the wrong diet, you're giving them the wrong thing, they're not going to sleep in the wrong time. It doesn't matter how much time you're sleeping with them, they're going to be worse off in the future. That is why they don't win this debate. And in fact, we get more people trusting our parents and trusting this content, which is bad for the children. That is how we win this debate. That is why I'm proud to refer.
Well, thanks to the speech and all three sorts of thoroughly enjoyable debate. And I think cross the floor and check out what I think on each other.
Goodbye. 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 Goodbye.
That was a good one. I thought they were just going to wow for both things.